Toy Story 5, Frozen 3, Zootopia 2. Can't Disney come up with an original story?
Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, E-Steam The Sands of Time. It's action and adventure in ancient Egypt in this terrific teen time travel romance. Get your copy of E-Steam The Sands of Time at your favorite online bookseller today.
Newly reinstalled Disney CEO Bob Iger has announced sequels to popular Disney animated films Toy Story, Frozen, and Zootopia. Now, on a Q1 earnings call, Disney's new reinstated CEO Bob Iger announced that he was going to be making a Toy Story 5, a Frozen 3, and a Zootopia 2, and his reasons, I believe, for making these sequels to sequels of popular franchise films is because Disney is in some serious dire straits as related to some really bad investments, and they need these sequels to be cash grab sequels that will allow Disney to start heading back on a road to profitability. Now, when I take a critical examination of Bob Iger's announcement of these sequels to Toy Story, Frozen, and Zootopia, the reason why he's making these sequels is he's trying to follow in the footsteps of Michael Eisner, who applied a similar approach back in the 1990s. Now, back in the 1990s, Michael Eisner went out and made direct-to-video sequels to hit films like Beauty and the Beast, films like Aladdin, films like Cinderella and The Little Mermaid, and these sequels, while they were popular on direct-to-video and sold very well, what they did was long-term tarnish the brand because many fans of those films felt that these stories watered down the original story and took away from their emotional impact. Because what made these stories like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, and Cinderella classics for Disney was the fact that they had a concrete ending, and that ending left things to the viewer's imagination. And with Disney going out here and making these sequels to these classic Disney films, this really took away from the impact of the original, and this is one of the things that Disney was forced to stop making these sequels because people felt like it took away from the original. However, with Disney right now in dire straits due to a series of really bad investments and an overconfidence in intellectual properties continuing to perform well, they are struggling to make money at this point. Now, Disney, back a couple of years ago, thought that the Marvel Cinematic Universe would continue to remain profitable, and as they went from Phase 3 to Phase 4, they thought that the Marvel Cinematic Universe would remain profitable into the 2020s, the way it was in the late 2000s and the 2010s. Unfortunately, the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe peaked with Avengers Endgame, and once it peaked with Avengers Endgame, people were not interested in Marvel Cinematic Universe movies because they started to see the quality of these movies really start to decline after Captain America Civil War, which basically was the end of the second act of the Infinity Saga. And with the Infinity Saga basically ending on the second act, the story was going into declining action, and as the story went into declining action, Kevin Feige got overconfident and still continued to pump out lots of properties, costing Marvel Studios lots of money, and parent company Disney wound up taking a loss on Marvel's Phase 4, as they went out here and made lots of different projects as related to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and saturated the market. And even before the Marvel Cinematic Universe started to decline in popularity, we started to see the entire Lucasfilm Star Wars brand basically fall completely apart under Kathleen Kennedy. And as Lucasfilm's sequel trilogy did not go out here and perform well, Disney wound up taking even more losses as related to not only the film, but also to the merchandising, because these days Star Wars merchandise rots on the shelf right next to many Marvel characters from failed movies like Eternals, Thor Love and Thunder, and even properties like the Marvel Studios She-Hulk series and other films that underperform as related to Disney's intellectual properties. Now, another big loss for Disney was their purchase of Fox, and Disney thought that they were going to go out here and corner the entire market as related to the media oligarchy, making it go from the big six to the big four by purchasing Fox from Rupert Murdoch. And when they went out here and bought Fox, what they did was they bit off more than they could chew financially, because as Disney went out here taking out loans to go out here and buy the intellectual property catalog of Fox, they thought they would gain a lot of wealth from purchasing those assets. Unfortunately, they didn't understand that many of the intellectual properties that they purchased were depreciating in value, and even though they spent billions to get these intellectual properties, they did not have much value to the audiences of Gen Z and Generation Alpha, because many of these intellectual properties were over 40 years old, and with these characters and IPs being over 40 years old, there wasn't much way for Disney to go out here and market those properties into hits, because this generation was not relating to these characters who we had already seen in multiple films, and now those properties were lowering in value. I mean, things like The Simpsons, which has been around for almost 35 years and is just basically a show that they're just pumping out just for the sake of trying to win a declining Sunday night, and things like Alien and Predator, these are concepts from my generation, Generation X, and these children who grew up 20 to 25 years later, they no longer relate to these concepts and see these characters as properties they have any sort of connection with. So Disney thought that they would go out here and buy all of the Fox IPs and be able to profit from the Fox IPs. Unfortunately, they didn't understand what I understand as somebody who has studied the entertainment industry for over 25 years, that IPs lose value over time because the audience, as they're growing older, what happens is if they don't pass these characters on, many of the kids don't really care. And some kids just aren't going to care at all because these are not their characters, because they want characters that reflect their pop culture. They don't want characters that relate to somebody else's pop culture, because somebody's pop culture is a snapshot of their lifetimes and experiences. So trying to make characters from old IPs into today, it doesn't really work, because this generation has gone out here, they're living a different life, they're living in a different world, they're living with different experiences, and this is something Bob Iger didn't understand when he was running Disney, and it was something that Bob Chapek really didn't understand. And both of these guys, as they were running Disney, thought that they could coast on these older IPs, and unfortunately what happened was you couldn't coast on these IPs because the audience had changed, and the population of Gen Xers and baby boomers who used to know these IPs, we're getting older, we're dying off, and what's happening is the younger kids aren't relating to any of the characters that Disney is currently producing, and they're trying to continue to make money on older IPs like Marvel and Lucasfilm, not understanding these IPs basically have depreciated in value, and they have no social value to today's audience. Now, as Disney was over relying on Marvel Studios and Lucasfilm to continue having billion-dollar box office Disney also made some really bad business decisions as related to investing their intellectual properties. Now, before Disney went out and launched the Disney Plus streaming service, Netflix and other streamers were actually paying Disney to license their content on their streaming service. And this was a revenue stream that was very profitable for Disney, but Disney thought that they would reap more profits by having their own streaming service with their own content instead of going out here and taking the payments from platforms like Netflix and other platforms like Tubi and Amazon, which were again paying Disney like a syndicator for their content. And Disney thought they would reap more profits by opening up their own streaming service, Disney Plus. Now, this decision to go out and have your own platform for streaming was a really bad one, and I saw it as a major mistake from Disney when they announced Disney Plus, I think about 2 years ago. Because at that point, the whole platform for streaming was already saturated, similar to the way TV got saturated when TV went digital in 2009, and we went from a 500 channel universe to about a 2,000 channel universe, and with so much content on so many different channels encroaching on each other, there weren't enough eyeballs to watch all of that content. And we saw a similar situation happening with the streaming services, with there being multiple streaming services offering multiple content on multiple platforms. There just was too much. There was too much content out there, and there weren't enough people on the planet to watch it all. And in addition to this, you had another streaming service that people had to pay for, and again, paying for all of these streaming services proved to be too costly for most American homes. And instead of people just going out and, like I used to do, just keeping a Netflix subscription and just paying for it constantly, even though you didn't watch it, what people started to do was they started to get really selective, and they would, if a new program came on, they would pay for it to watch that content, and then they would end their subscription after they finished watching what they wanted to watch. So with all of these different streaming services, you had Netflix, Disney Plus, and you also had things like HBO Max and Hulu. Again, it just got to be overwhelming, and most people just didn't have the time to watch all of these different streaming services and can continue to pay $7 a month for one service, $14 for HBO Max, and another $8 or $9 for Netflix. This was adding up for the average American home, and most people just could not afford to continue paying these prices, and this proved to be a major mistake for Disney under Bob Iger and Bob Chapek's leadership to launch Disney Plus, and they thought there would be a big audience for their content the way it was for Netflix with shows like Luke Cage, which basically broke the server. But the reason why Luke Cage broke the server is because this was a show that was unique to Netflix, it was exclusive to Netflix, and it was of high quality, something that many of the shows that on Disney Plus just were not. And many of these shows on Disney Plus, they were not of high quality at all. And this further exacerbated Disney's problems because as they were looking to compete in the saturated streaming service market, Disney was losing billions of dollars, and this further exacerbated its problems as related to its whole financial situation. Because again, Disney had already taken out huge loans to buy Fox, and they had already spent money to buy Marvel. They had spent money to buy Lucasfilm, and these intellectual properties just were not pulling their financial weight. And they weren't pulling their financial weight basically because again, these assets had depreciated due to the fact that a generation had not been interested in them like their fathers and grandfathers were, and men like Bob Iger really were not thinking about the passage of time and how the passage of time basically rendered these assets of lower value than they were over 25 to 40 years ago when many of these IPs were big hits at the box office. Now, as Disney was struggling with its issues as related to the purchase of Fox, the launch of Disney Plus, and the underperformance of many of its properties like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which lost 50% of its value as part of Phase 4, we had Disney also going out here and making a major mistake by trying to sell films to social justice types. Now, Disney started a new slate of animated projects looking to promote identity politics over story, and as they looked to promote identity politics over story, they went out here and created 3 major flops that performed poorly at the box office. Now, these films were supposed to be new and original concepts, but these concepts basically were not as commercially marketable as previous films like Frozen and Toy Story, and these properties basically, they were not things that Disney could go out here and merchandise to children in things like Happy Meals or merchandise to them in things like toys. So you had Disney going out here making these kind of films to try to appeal to the social justice audience, and while these films were just out here and allowing them to promote their social justice ideals of so-called diversity, what they did was not appeal to most audiences because the subject matter would make people extremely uncomfortable. For example, in the film Turning Red, it's supposed to be about a young girl dealing with her first period, and again, this is a subject matter that is extremely uncomfortable for most audiences to go out here and watch. And people just were not into watching a film that discussed very intimate subject matter, and while this film cost $178 million, it did not go out here and become as profitable as Disney expected, and it was one of the first films that they made that underperformed. Now, the second film that Disney made was Lightyear, and Lightyear was supposed to be a different take on the character Buzz Lightyear, and the Buzz Lightyear movie cost $200 million to make and was the first major flop as related to last year for Disney, underperforming very badly, and it underperformed because most people were talking about the kiss between 2 women and not the story of Buzz Lightyear and how he became an astronaut. Now, what further alienated a lot of audiences was not only talking about this one scene, it was the fact that Tim Allen, the original voice of Buzz Lightyear, was not a part of the film, and as he wasn't a part of the film, it really alienated a lot of viewers who grew up with the original Toy Story. Now, Disney wanted to say they wanted to go on a different take with Lightyear, but that different take turned off a lot of people who grew up with the character and did not like the themes that were presented in Lightyear. Now, Lightyear had a lot of merchandising, which was different from Turning Red, but most of those toys were not bought by anyone outside of G.I. Joe classified fans, who mostly bought the jet from Lightyear and modified it to fit their G.I. Joe classified figures, because many of the figures right now are warming the pegs, and they're warming the pegs because the story in Lightyear alienated most of those people who were watching family films, and they weren't really happy about watching Lightyear, which really didn't give you a story that really made you care about it. And again, this is a problem with many of Disney's later films. They don't answer the critical question, why should we care? And because nobody cares, nobody had a reason to go see Turning Red. Nobody had a reason to go out here and see Lightyear. And the biggest failure for Disney since the Black Cauldron in the 1980s was the Disney animated film, which came out over the 2022 holiday season, Strange World. Now, Strange World was supposed to be, again, featuring another alphabet character and also had a lot of odd and weird concepts, but there was no real marketing as related to selling the story and, again, answering the critical question that screenwriters like myself have to answer, and that is, why should we care? There was no way to sell the audience on why they should care about Strange World, and Disney did next to no advertising, and as a result, nobody was invested in the Strange World, and the Strange World was another $180 to $200 million animated film that wound up failing at the box office. And in Bob Iger's mind, it was the whole Disney's creating original concepts being the reason that this movie failed, when the actual reason why this movie failed was because, one, Disney did not market the films, and two, Disney just went out here and took these far-left social justice concepts and tried to sell them to these so-called social justice audiences who seem to not have any money to go to the theater. Yes, they've got money to go to Starbucks to go watch pirate versions on Starbucks' Wi-Fi, but they ain't got no money to spend $14 on a ticket to go see these movies at the box office. So that really shows me that the social justice types are not as serious as they say they are about the representation that they so-called demand. So that's one of the things that's hampered Disney, and Bob Iger, now desperate to try to save Disney, he's again applying the same dysfunctional approaches that Michael Eisner did in the past, relying on sequels and nostalgia to try to appeal to audiences. And as he goes out here looking to use nostalgia, he's hoping that a Frozen 3, a Toy Story 5, and a Zootopia 2 will help Disney get its box office streak back. But it's just not going to happen, because in the case of Toy Story, that story basically ended in Toy Story 3, and Toy Story 4 was a movie that basically underperformed. Yes, it performed okay, but it did not perform as well as expected because the story basically was told in Toy Story 3. So Toy Story 3 was the end of Andy's story and the end of Woody, Buzz, and Jesse's story. But Disney, because they're desperate for cash, what they're looking to do is go out here and pull a cash grab by making these sequels. And they're thinking, oh, if we go out here and make these sequels, people will get caught up in their nostalgia. And as they get caught up in their nostalgia, reminiscing about these old films, what they will do is want to go out here and see the same characters over and over again. But I see it as what's going to happen is Disney's not going to get the profits from a Toy Story 5 or a Frozen 3 or a Zootopia 2, because those franchises are basically depreciating as we speak, and the audience is basically over these stories and they're ready to move on. The big mistake that I believe Bob Iger is making is walking away from original concepts, because what I see kids wanting are their own pop culture, and what they want are their own stories that reflect to their experiences. But the problem is Bob Iger took a stupid risk, which is what beta males do. A beta male will go out here and take a stupid risk on something like a Turning Red, a Lightyear, or a Strange World, hoping to pander to people instead of looking to build an audience with an original story that can relate to the audience. Now, I myself, I've been writing stories out here like E-Steam, The Sands of Time, and when I was writing Sands of Time, I was thinking about how to make a story with a black princess that would be relatable to a larger audience. And what I wanted to do was bring ancient Egypt to young viewers, and I also wanted to do a bit of a time travel story where you could see the whole theme of love that's in many Disney princess movies, but this would be a story about love transcending time, and that would be, I believe, a theme people could relate to. So when I go out here and I design a new concept, I want to design something that relates to people, relates to everyday life, and as I'm doing the story that relates to everyday life, I'm focusing on things that people want to do and accomplish, like in the case of Princess Eastine. What she wants to do is she wants to be a woman. She wants to go out here and show that she can do things like other women, and she wants to go out here and take on those challenges, and that's what this whole story of Sands of Time was about. And again, this is the kind of story that would make for some great film, a great Disney animated film, but Disney don't want to do those type of films. No, what Iger wants to do is play things safe, and he wants to play it safe because he's already failed at taking risks, but it wasn't the risks that were the problem. The problem was he was looking to pander to the social justice types that go out here and try to watch pirate versions of movies on these bootleg streaming services, and not the paying customers who go out here and want to watch stuff like Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, or films like The Lion King. People want stories that relate to their experiences. They want to see themselves, and Disney is not reflecting that in their films, and that's the reason why they're struggling now like they did in the 1970s. Because as a kid who grew up with Disney in the late 70s and the early 80s under the Don Bluth era, I can tell you why Disney was suffering back then, because many of their films were extremely dark, and their films, again, just weren't relatable to people. I mean, stuff like Robin Hood and the Rescuers and the Black Cauldron, yeah, they were very entertaining films, but they had problems as related to their themes. They had problems as related to their characters. And when you watch films like Robin Hood, The Rescuers, The Fox and the Hound, again, very dark stories and no real optimistic ending. So it's very hard to sit there and watch them in comparison to something like Little Mermaid or Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast or Lion King or Mulan or Tarzan. All of those films were just fun to watch, and you can watch them over and over again. And same thing with films like the Toy Story trilogy and the first Incredibles. I mean, those were just great films. But when I look at what Disney's producing right now, it mirrors a lot of what I saw in the 1970s. And what I saw in the 1970s and 80s when I was a little kid, again, these were dreary, depressing films. And that's why I believe it's time for Bob Iger to just step aside, and because he's basically the one who orchestrated the acquisition of Marvel, the acquisition of Lucasfilm, the acquisition of Fox, thinking he could go out here and profit from depreciating IPs and not understanding the business of entertainment, and now wants to try to use nostalgia once again, not understanding the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. Because Michael Eisner tried to do this with Beauty and the Beast 2, Aladdin 2, Lion King 2, Little Mermaid 2 and 3 and 4, and eventually the audience got tired of these made-for-video sequels, and they were hurting Disney's brand. And as they were hurting Disney's brand, Disney had to get out of the sequel business, and here we have Bob Iger, like a dog, going back to his vomit, going back to the sequel train, hoping to make an easy cash grab, but it's not going to work at this point, because when you're trying to make sequel after sequel, eventually the franchise does get old, like in the case of DreamWorks and Shrek. What happened was you made Shrek 2, you made Shrek the third, and then you made another Shrek, but eventually DreamWorks had to stop making Shrek movies because they were depreciating in value, they had diminishing returns, because the story had already been told, and once the story is told, you have to put a period at the end and move on. Unfortunately, Hollywood, they get so addicted to the box office and trying to make bigger box office, they keep playing it safe, and this is what leads to many of these studios now being in the fiscal trouble that they're currently in. They're currently in this fiscal trouble because they continue to try to go out here and spend money on these films, hoping for easy box office instead of taking calculated risks on intellectual properties like I currently produce, stories like an Esteem, The Sands of Time, or an ISIS, Imitation of Life, or a John Haynes, The Man Who Rules the World, or an ISIS, Bride of Dracula. I mean, the kind of stories that, yes, this is a new character, but with a new character, you can introduce a new character to a new audience, and you can have a possibility of connecting with that audience and reaching that audience with new characters. Moreover, you can also merchandise these new characters and again reach that audience in things like Happy Meals, reach that audience in things like toys, and reach that audience with completely different characters, with completely different stories that are relatable to today. That is what Disney should be doing, reaching out to independent creators like myself and many others who have great IPs. But instead of reaching out to those creators, what Disney does is now, after seeing the failures of projects like Strange World, Turning Red, and Lightyear, what they want to do is retreat back to a process of begging, and as related, as I see it, to these old projects. And again, these old projects are going to fail because the audience, after the nostalgia wears off, are going to realize they're not getting anything special. And again, showing me that Bob Iger has no vision for Disney. And again, the board is participating in what I call insanity, because they're expecting to do the exact same thing and get a different result. But you don't get a different result unless you change up things, like Disney was forced to in the 1980s when they hired Michael Eisner, and he was able to shift the gears at Disney and turn things around by introducing new concepts and new stories and reviving its fledgling animated division, which took some ridiculous risks, I think, with Black Cauldron and Fox and the Hound and Rescuers and all of those films, because again, they were just too dark, and not understanding that if you're going to explore these kind of concepts, you have to study the things that you want to do with them. Like I myself, if I want to do darker characters, I study things like anime to understand how those stories work, because those stories have a unique model, and if you don't understand the model, you're going to go out here and make a mistake like they did back in the 2000s with Treasure Planet and with Home on the Range. Disney was out here making films that didn't answer that critical question, why should we care? You have to answer that question before you go out here and pitch a project. And with all of the nepotism and cronyism at Disney, there is nobody asking that question, and screenwriters and producers are not told to answer it, and that's why Disney is in the dire straits it's currently in, and this is why they're in the worst state they were since the 70s, with the bad investments and the lack of creativity, because the whole thing is, with a streaming service, content is king, and if you don't have strong content, you're not going to be able to keep your audience, because what Disney's big mistake with streaming was thinking, oh, we're going to go rely on old content, not understanding old content is already depreciated, and it's your new content that crashes the server, like Netflix's Luke Cage, and it's that new content that brings the viewers in to watch the old content. So running a streaming service is something that you have to have a good eye for media, like I have studying it for over 25 years. And running a streaming service means that you have to have good content that's new. And Marvel Studios was making good new content. There's shows like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, that was okay. But after that, we got the WandaVision, which was mediocre. We got the other shows that were just not that great. And then we got the She-Hulk show, which was absolute garbage, and the producers there did not take their job seriously, and that really hurt Disney, because when people hear that there's garbage on a streaming service, they're not going to want to invest their money for a month and to renew, because what you want is those renewals, and that's why you want to make sure your show is fresh out the gate for the 8 to 13 episodes that it's produced. Because yes, the first 4, you may get that person in to spend $8, but your whole goal is to get them to continue spending their money, and that's a mistake that Disney made as related to their whole platform for Disney Plus. They were in their feelings about making all this money from these new projects like WandaVision and all these other Marvel shows, but they weren't investing in an overall platform of content, and that's what the thing that bit them in the butt as related to Disney Plus, because you need to have a whole platform of fresh and original content in order for a platform like Disney Plus to thrive. And Disney didn't really have a vision for Disney Plus. Their whole thing is they wanted to get in their feelings about Netflix having their content on their platform, not understanding, again, Netflix was paying them for that content, and that was all profit, that was all gravy. And again, this was extra revenue they were making, but it all shows the just inept leadership of Bob Iger, who again was more about ego and trying to make a legacy instead of having a vision for a direction he wanted to take the company in. And that's the big problem with Disney right now. Disney has a leadership crisis, and instead of them trying to find a visionary to turn the company around with fresh, new 21st century concepts, what they're doing is going back to 20th century IPs that have depreciated, hoping that they will get some fast dollars from nostalgia, and again, showing me that Disney is in the worst state of decline it was since the 1970s, and this time there may not be a way for it to turn around, because there's no visionary like Michael Eisner on the Disney board, and there's nobody out there making projects out there, guys like a Tim Burton and many others like Brad Bird and many others who went out here and made many of the iconic projects over at platforms like Disney and Pixar, and they don't have the creative people. No, they've just gone out here and gotten a lot of people with nepotism and cronyism, and that could possibly lead to the demise of the once legendary brand of Disney. And Disney again struggling not only with its creative, not only struggling with its financial, but also struggling with its theme parks, which still have the highest prices. So there's a major serious crisis at Disney, and right now they just don't have that visionary to lead them out of the darkness. There's nobody to put a light at the end of the tunnel, because what they're doing with Bob Iger with these announcements of Toy Story 5, of a dead franchise as I see it, the Frozen 3, which is starting to cool off, and Zootopia 2 is showing me that everybody working at Disney is Arkham certified, and if they don't get rid of these people who belong in straitjackets, Disney may be a forgotten brand like Woolworth and Gimbel's happened in the 80s and the 90s. Now, if you want to check out my version of a Disney princess story, Easting the Sands of Time, you can find that book on Kindle and paperback on Amazon.com. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read that story for free. And I've got other action-packed fantasy stories like the Isis series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, and I've also got some great books like the Spinsterella trilogy, the sorority book, The Thetas, and my vampire novel, Eternal Night. All of these books are available on paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com, and they are all fun stories, and I think you'll enjoy them. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, Godbreaker at online booksellers today.